Hello, class. I hope everybody's doing fine and that everybody's feeling well, everybody's family's feeling well. Uh, uh, Thank y'all for being flexible. Hopefully, this will help you before you take the test. I wanted to go over some sticky issues in Chapter 5. I didn't feel comfortable with how we covered operant conditioning, so I wanted to go back over operant conditioning. Classical conditioning we covered well. And so you just need to review that. Uh, but operant conditioning, the main difference between classical conditioning and operant conditioning is that operant conditioning, the response happens first. In classical conditioning, the response always happens last. So let me repeat that. In operant condition, the response happens first, and then a certain stimulus will occur. So, for example, in classical conditioning, what we have is a reflex. So the response is happening last. Somebody gets stuck with a pen and they pin and they jump. Someone gets a little puff of air in their eye, they blink. That's a reflex. What we do in classical conditioning is we associate a neutral stimulus with a reflex. And that becomes so associated that the new neutral stimulus introduced will elicit the same response. That's when learning has taken place in classical conditioning. In operant conditioning, what happens is there is a response first and then a consequence to that response. So, for example, a cat in a cage is touching all the bars and everything, and all of a sudden touches this one thing that is the lever, the door opens up. There was a response. The cat touched the bar, it opened up. Now the new thing, the new stimulus of an open cage reinforces the response that was just a haphazard response. No learning had taken place yet. And so there's a haphazard response. And then they are reinforced positively, so that behavior will continue. That is when learning takes place in operant conditioning. It's always the consequences. So here's how we have them linked up. You have a response first, and then there's a consequence that comes after. That consequence will be reinforced, will reinforce the previous behavior. So that response, that random response, will be reinforced. Let me tell you one that's kind of complicated, but it will come in with some of the later learning. Say you want to train a pigeon or a bird to go and pick up an umbrella, put it in its beak, walk across a wire, put both wings out like it's balancing across the wire, and then go down the other side and bow. One wing here, the other one, and bow. That's a very complex behavior. With operant conditioning, what we can do is we can train a bird to do that type of complex behavior. It's a long, tedious process. But what happens is you successively reward that bird for doing closer each time successive to what you want that bird to do. So, for example, the bird's in the cage, it goes over near the umbrella because it's doing a behavior that's close to a behavior that you want it to do. You send it a reward. And then that bird is going to, it did a behavior haphazardly, just randomly. and you reinforce that bird for doing that random behavior, that random behavior now will be more likely to happen because you reinforced it. So the next time the bird is hungry, it will walk toward that umbrella. You wait till it gets even closer to the umbrella. Then you reward it. Then the next time, you only reward it when it touches the umbrella. Then the next time, you only reward it when you put the umbrella in the beak. The bird puts the umbrella in the beak. And then the next time, it's only when the bird picks it up. And then it's only when the bird walks on that wire up to the thing. And each time you successively are rewarding that bird for an approximation closer to the behavior that you had before. So that type of operant conditioning is called shaping, where you're slowly shaping the behavior to be more and more what you want it to be. We do that with very complex behaviors. Might be something, say in football, a technique, and the coach gives him reinforcement for doing something better. And then he wants him to get down into a three-point stance, and his butt's too high. And then the next time he wants him to fire off. And each time he does it, he's closer and closer, and he'll be reinforced for successfully doing this. It can be the same thing with study skills. It can be the same thing with painting and doing some type of technique, and somebody is reinforcing that behavior. So with Skinner, what happens is there is a random behavior, and it has a consequence. And that consequence will either make that behavior more likely or less likely to happen. Thorndike's law of effect. He's the one who had the cat in the box and other ones. And what happens is the cat randomly touches a piece of the cage and the cage opens up. That would be a positive outcome and strengthen behavior. A negative outcome would be that nothing happens. A negative outcome weakens the behavior. So we'll get to the positive and negative later. Think of positive as add, plus, and negative as taking something away. So it's not necessarily always what we commonly think of as positive and negative. We'll get to that in a little bit. The Skinner box, controlled conditions to study operant conditioning. Operant, there's a lever in the corner of the box. The rat is just touching everything in the box. All of a sudden he touches this lever, a piece of food comes out. What Skinner said is that random behavior that produced a consequence, which was positive, food, by pressing that lever, which was just a random act for that rat, will make that behavior more likely to happen in the future. We already talked about shaping. Shaping is when you want to teach an animal or a person to do a very complex behavior. You reward it in approximations, the closer it gets to the desired behaviors. So since it's very complex, you just reward it each baby step of the way, all the way through the process, and that's called shaping. Here's something that's going to be tough for people, and this is one that is often missed on the test. The difference between positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. Get out of your mind that what is negative reinforcement. Most people would say it's punishment. It's not. Both of these, positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement, are good things for the individual. So let me give you an example. Positive reinforcement, a kid makes an A, you give him $1. That's positive reinforcement. A kid comes in the kitchen and whines, and you give him a piece of candy and he stops whining. That's positive reinforcement. Negative reinforcement is where something is negative in your life. Something is negative in your life. And you remove that negativity. You subtract that negativity. So you take away of something that's unpleasant. So a kid does not like to eat spinach. The mom says you have to eat the spinach. He cries. The crying behavior, that behavior, the mother says, okay, you don't have to eat the spinach. It has removed something negative from its environment. It does not have to eat the spinach, so therefore, something good happened to that individual. Let's say somebody, I gave this example in class, somebody walks down the street and a dog bites them. Now somebody walks down the other street to get to where they're going, one street over. You have removed the negative, unpleasant thing in your environment. So you did another event response. Now it's being reinforced, not by giving you something positive, but by taking something negative away. So understand, positive reinforcement will increase a behavior and make it keep going. Negative reinforcement will also make a behavior more likely to happen in the future and to keep going. This almost sounds counterintuitive, but think of it as plus and minus. Positive reinforcement plus, I'm getting something new that is good. Negative reinforcement is I'm taking away something negative, which for me is good. Both positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement increase the likelihood that the behavior is going to happen in the future. I know that one's tough. Let me just say what punishment is. We'll get to that in a second. But it is not negative reinforcement. What punishment is, there are two types of punishment. One is positive punishment, which does not sound like a thing that could exist. But what positive punishment is, think of addition and subtraction again. Positive punishment is where you add something to decrease a behavior. So a spanking would be punishment. And it would be positive punishment because you're adding something to the situation, the spanking. You put a kid in timeout. You're taking something away from him as a punishment. That would be called negative punishment. Taking away a young man or young lady in high school's cell phone as a punishment would be negative punishment. It would not be negative reinforcement. It would be negative punishment. You are removing something and it makes the behavior less likely to happen. Positive punishment, scolding, spanking, anything where you're adding something as a punishment. Negative punishment is when you're taking away something that the individual would desire. And so negative reinforcement is when you take away something and it's a good thing that it's taken away. It's reinforced and it makes the behavior more likely to happen. Negative punishment is where you take something away and it was a good for that individual. Now taking it away is a negative, it's a punishment. It's punishment by subtraction. Positive punishment is punishment by addition, the switch or something like that. Okay, let's go to the other two terms here. Primary reinforcer, innately satisfying. Innate means you don't have to learn this. You know this without any training. So a primary reinforcer could be food. A primary reinforcer could be sex. A primary reinforcer could be anything that is good, that does not have to be learned, that the individual would enjoy. Secondary reinforcers are acquired positive value through experience. So, for example, if we went to some tribe in Amazon and we gave them $1 million in cash, it would have no positive value whatsoever for them. I can think of some ways they might use it, but it's overall, it would not have the same effect that it would on us, because we had to learn the value and that money could buy something else. Primary reinforcers are reinforcers that do not have to be learned. Secondary reinforcers are reinforcers that have to be learned over time. So let me think of another secondary reinforcer. Praise would be a secondary reinforcer. They would have to learn the language. They would have to understand what this means. It would be done through learning. A pat on the back would be secondary reinforcer. Money would be a secondary reinforcer. Little kids get coins in school, in grammar school, and they're able to turn in these coins for things later. Those would be secondary reinforcer. Primary reinforcer for them would be candy. They have to learn that these coins, the secondary reinforcer, can get me primary reinforcer. So that's why it has that effect. Okay, now here's another one that is somewhat difficult, but when you think about it, it's not difficult at all. I'm going to try and give you some examples with these. So, continuous reinforcement. That means the behavior is going to be reinforced every time. I'm trying to teach my dog to sit. And so I take my dog, I take a piece of food, I push it down, I say sit, and every time that I say sit and the dog does it, 100% of the time, continuous reinforcement, I do it every time. That is continuous reinforcement, 100% reinforcement. When you're trying to train an animal or a person to do something, continuous reinforcement in the learning phase during acquisition is the best way to do it. The second type here is what's called partial reinforcement. Partial reinforcement only occurs some of the time. So you have continuous reinforcement, you're reinforcing every single time. Partial reinforcement, you only reinforce part of the time. So with partial reinforcement, there's certain schedules that you can see. And so the first is ratio versus interval. Now listen real closely. It's going to be hard when I give you an example, but ratio has to do with number, like times. So I will give my child $10 for every 5 A's that they bring in math. They've been struggling in math. So I'm going to give $10 bonus for every 5 A's the child brings home in math. That would be a ratio. Every 5 times the individual does it, they will get reinforced. Many jobs are like this. Car salesman. If you sell this many cars in a month, you will get this bonus. And so there's a ratio of how many times and the behavior once again. So interval has to do with time as in the sense of clock time, chronos, time elapsing. So ratio has to do with how many times it happens, and interval has to do with the elapse of time. So if you get paid every Friday, that would be you are reinforced every 7 days. If you get paid biweekly, you know your interval time will be 2 weeks. If I say, if this bird pecks at this umbrella within this 5-minute period, I will reinforce it at the end of that interval if it did it during that interval. So watch, that bird can peck 100 times. If I set up in that 5-minute interval that if it did it in that time, it doesn't make a difference whether it does it once, 100, 1,000 times, I will reinforce it at the end of the interval. So ratio has to do with the relationship of how many times a behavior happens with a reinforcement. It is a partial reinforcement, but it's set up how many times, and then a reinforcement happens. Interval schedules happen if an individual did this in this particular time period. So I own a car dealership. I could set up bonuses. One would be by every 3 cars that you sell, you get a bonus of $1,000. That would be a ratio. If I set up interval, if you sell 3 cars in this time period, and at the end of this time period, if you sold 3 cars, you'll get reinforced. Doesn't make a difference if you sold 9, 12. If it's the interval schedule, it's only at the end of that interval, did they meet the times, the amount of times that you set up ahead of time. All right, with ratio, there's fixed and variable. Fixed and variable. Fixed schedule is predictable. So if I tell my kid for every 5 A's that they bring home, I will give them $10. After a while, they'll figure out, I need some money this weekend. Let me make some A's. So it's predictable. The individual can figure out when they're going to get paid. If it's a variable schedule, they don't know when they're going to get paid. And so what happens is I will set up, on average, they're going to get paid for every 5 things. And then I will set up a schedule where they might get paid on the very first time and get $10, and then on the 9th time, and then on the 20th time, and then on the 38th time. They have no clue when they're going to get the money. It can be the same amount of times as in the fixed, but the variable, when they don't know that they're going to get the money or the reinforcement, they will do the behavior more often, and they will also do it long after you've taken the reward away. So if you want to teach an animal or a child to do a particular behavior, if you use the fixed schedule, they can figure it out, and as soon as you take away the reward, they will stop doing it. The variable schedule, they will continue doing the behavior for a longer period of time because they don't know when the variable has ended. Okay, so here's the schedules of reinforcement. Fixed ratio, you put them together. Fixed ratio, it's based on a set number of behaviors. Variable ratio, it's based on the average but unpredictable number of behaviors. So if I do a fixed ratio every 5 A's, they will get reinforced. If I just do it one time every 3 A's, and then the next time every 6 A's, and the next time every 5 A's, it will average the same as the fixed ratio, but the behavior will continue for a longer period of time. Fixed interval, that would be I get paid every 2 weeks. It's fixed, it doesn't vary, and it's an amount of time. Variable interval is rewarding after various amounts of time have passed. Did they do this behavior within this day? Then the next time, did they do the behavior over the next 8 days? And then did they do the behavior over the next 12 days? And then over the next day? They don't know when they're going to be reinforced, and the interval varies, so they just have no clue. Long term, better way of learning. Okay, we already talked about this. Punishment decreases the likelihood of behavior. Remember, this is not negative reinforcement. Negative reinforcement removes something that is bad in your environment. Punishment puts something negative in your environment. If it's positive punishment, it adds something negative. If it's negative punishment, it removes something that's positive or pleasant for you. All right, with operant conditioning, timing a little bit different than classical conditioning. A kid makes 5 A's. The parents give them a reward 3 days later. It will have an effect on behavior. But if you have to wait for it, it has less effect than if it's immediate. So somebody makes an A on the test. It would be more of a reinforcement if they receive those grades immediately rather than delayed. Immediate versus delayed punishment. Same thing. Immediate's more effective, but delayed can have an effect. In fact, I know for kids, sometimes waiting for the punishment might be worse than the punishment itself, not knowing what it is. Immediate reinforcement versus delayed punishment. Immediate consequences usually win. So immediate reinforcement, immediate delayed punishment, that should be delayed. Immediate reinforcement, delayed punishment. All right. Applied behavior analysis. This is also called behavior modification. So, for example, with little Albert, what they could have done is do what's called counter conditioning. They made little Albert afraid of a rat. What they could have done by little Albert touches the rat, a random behavior, and then there's a loud noise behind him, a consequence. It's a one that he wants to avoid, but it's there. And so that behavior reinforces his fear. He doesn't like it. It's something that is bad in his life. And so basically little Albert is punished for touching the rat. And the positive punishment is that boom, that big old clanging sound behind him that gives him the startle effect. What they could have done with little Albert is slowly bring the rat in and let him touch it and give him some positive reinforcement for dealing with the rat. So, for example, somebody who's afraid of snakes, the same thing is shaping. We can modify somebody's behaviors where they will not be afraid of snakes, and we can do it one of two ways. It's called systematic desensitization, where we can show them a picture of a snake, have them breathe quietly, relax themselves, recognize nothing bad happened, and then bring them in a room. There's a snake in the aquarium. touch the aquarium, calm your breathing, recognize nothing bad happened. The guy takes out the snake, calm yourself, let you touch the snake, and eventually hold the snake and go through this, and it can modify the behavior. We do this with things like cigarette smoking and stuff like that, behavior modification. With little Albert, what they could have done is counter conditioning and modify his behavior. Stopping smoking, that would be counter conditioning, because you have learned through smoking to have a reinforcement with the nicotine whenever you do that behavior. So you have to do the counter conditioning to make that something not positive. The use of operant condition principles to change human behavior. All human behavior understood is being influenced by rewards and punishment. So if something at one time punished somebody by it happening, now we want to reward somebody to desensitize them to that. If something was rewards, then we have to send punishment. So for example, with people who are alcoholics, there's a drug called antabuse. And antabuse, if they take that drug and then they introduce alcohol to their system, it forms a poison, and they will be sick, they will have diarrhea, they will be vomiting, they will be sicker than you and I have ever been in our life. It's like food poisoning on the max. And so what it attempts to do is take that reward thing that they had, the alcohol, and make it a punishment for drinking. Okay. Bandura did some type of learning. He proposed some type of learning that is neither classical nor operant learning. He also called this imitation or modeling. This is when we see somebody else do something and we imitate the behavior. It can be either vicarious reinforcement or vicarious punishment. We can see somebody who did drugs and watch them spiral down. That would be vicarious. Vicarious means I'm learning through somebody else's experience. We can do this by watching a movie. We can do this by reading a book. We can do it by watching a loved one go through something. So a little kid who sees his brother come home with an A on a test, and mom and dad just go crazy about reinforcing that behavior. He can say to himself, without him learning or being reinforced, that he can say, hey, I should bring home an A and I'll get treated the same way. That would be vicarious reinforcement, a good thing, or vicarious punishment, a negative thing. So observational behavior, this is his model, very simple. First, you have to attend to it, is the first step. And then retention. You have that memory going in. And then you do motor reproduction. So little kid observes pays attention, his dad is hammering in the backyard. He remembers that, and all of a sudden he picks up something like a hammer and starts hitting the wood. The motor reproduction and reinforcement or incentive conditions where parents could do something, and because he learned something through this, oh, isn't that cute? All right. Cognitive factors in learning. Tolman says that purposeful behavior is goal oriented. So in Tolman's model, that cat that's touching everything around, it wants to have a positive outcome. So he says behavior is goal directed toward an outcome. He also is expectancy learning and information. So this is very important for everybody in this class and everybody in college. There are people who repeatedly say, I'm no good in math. I can't do math. I can't do math. I can't do math. They have an expectation that they're not going to do well in math. And so what happens? They have an expectation. The learning is inhibited because they have this expectation. There's something called learned helplessness that we'll get to in a second. Learned helplessness is an example. Somebody goes out on a date in high school. They have an awful, awful experience. The next time they date somebody, they go out a little bit longer, but it's equally awful. They date another person, it's worse than they ever imagined. If they keep having a series of these type of really bad dating experiences, what will happen is that expectation, I'm never going to date anybody again, all men, all women, all whatever, are horrible. All of a sudden they meet the person of their dreams, but their expectation is that it's not going to work. So expectancy learning is an important thing that we do in academics, in our relationships, everything that we encounter in life. Our expectations really limit us and also open up our possibilities. The next one here is latent learning or implicit learning. It's very easy. Study rats in a maze. All right. What they did is they allowed the rats to walk through a maze and just explore it. They're not receiving any reinforcement. They're not receiving any punishment. They're not receiving any positive reinforcement, no negative reinforcement. Nothing is going on. What they found is just the fact that the rats were allowed to walk through the maze at a casual rate and not be reinforced. That then when they started offering reinforcement, whether it be positive, negative, or punishment, the rats learned the maze quicker who were allowed to just explore the maze on their own. So what this proves is that learning takes place whether we're being reinforced for it or not. There's such a thing as latent or implicit learning. And the rats in the maze are an example of this. Cognitive factors. Cognitive factors in learning. Studies of apes. There was a stick problem and a box problem that they did with these apes. And what happened is Kohler. And what happened was they put some bananas up hanging, and the apes were on the floor. Without training these apes how to solve this problem, so nobody reinforced them like shaping to put one box on top of the other box, or this stick that they had, the stick they got up on top. What the animals, apes, figured out was to get to the bananas up there, the reinforcement. They stacked the boxes, they got closer, but they still could not reach the bananas. And they had two sticks. They put two sticks, one in each hand, they couldn't reach it. Eventually, what the apes figured out was if they put the two sticks together, that they fit together, then they could knock the bananas down. So they solved the problem through insight learning. These are problems involving in which a sudden insight, aha moment, or understanding occurs. This is thinking outside the box. So here's one that supposedly was a real life story. There was a truck, and it went under a bridge, and the bridge was too low for this particular truck. And so the cab and the back part of the trailer were stuck under this bridge. They brought in all these experts, and they were trying to figure out how were they going to get this thing, how were they going to dismantle this truck so that they could get these pieces that were just lodged under the truck. And supposedly a little kid came walking home from school, and they're all trying to figure out how they're going to pull this cab and the trailer all apart that's lodged under here. And the little kid said, why don't you just let the air out of the tires? And so they let the air out of the tires, the truck moved back. That would be an example of insight learning. And supposedly this little kid did this without any assistance from anybody else, and out incited the adults there. This is just a picture of Kohler's experiment, insight learning, the boxes. He put the boxes together, they had the sticks, and then he had to put the two sticks together to get to the reward. All right, here's some biological constraints in learning, and we're getting to the end now. So the biological constraints in learning, the first is instinctive drift. So I have two dogs, two German Shepherds. They're wonderful pets, very good. We've taught them tricks and all of this. I can say, go to your room. Go to your room. And, I don't know if you saw, there goes one. Go to your room. And there goes another one. Go to your room. And so I have taught them certain things that they can do. Stay in your room. And, okay, y'all can come out. And certain things that I did in teaching these animals. And they're wonderful animals. But say we have some type of shortage, or I live near the woods and there's some wild pack of dogs roaming those woods. If my dogs get out and go into the woods and they stay with these animals, what will happen is that they will drift back to live with their instincts. They might be an enemy of people. They might be maybe these dogs that I have, they wouldn't chase a cat. But in this pack, as they go through their instinctive drift back to their primordial instincts and just survive on their instincts, that will be what instinctive drift is. So no matter what we learn teach our animals to do, the behaviors, they will have a tendency to go back to their basic instincts. The second one is preparedness. So instinctive drift is after they learn, it'll go back. Preparedness is species-specific biological predispositions to learn in certain ways and not others. So, for example, I can teach somebody, a child, to be afraid of a snake way more than I could teach them, way earlier than I could teach them to be afraid of a rat. Some people would say these two things are equal in danger. But what human beings seem to have is a script inside of them that is like a computer. It's hardwired. It's not something that's added, a program that's added. It's something that inside of us that's hardwired to be afraid of a snake. I can't teach a kid to be afraid of a car, although that might be much more dangerous than a snake. But there's something inside of us that would be easier learn to be afraid of a snake than a car or a rat or a bunny rabbit or anything else. All right. This is what we talked about before, psychological constraints. That mindset describe ways we believe, way beliefs about ability dictates goals. What we think we can learn and what we do learn. Okay, so the mindset, I'm horrible at math. If you have that mindset, you might have a teacher there in front of you that is a great teacher in math and could make it easy for you. But if you walk into that class, I'm horrible at math, it's not going to help. That's the fixed mindset, belief that qualities cannot change. Okay, here's an important thing for anybody in college. Uh, the brain and intelligence is pliable. You can become more intelligent. Give you an example. Say somebody is really in grammar school, I'm good at math. Why do they think they're good at math? I'm good at math because it's easy. That's why I'm good at math. It's easy. So if I'm good at math because it's easy, now all of a sudden I get to algebra and I can't do it. It's not easy. If I work and I exert effort and I keep trying and I'm trying and I'm trying and I'm trying, all of a sudden algebra becomes what? Easy. Why was I so smart in math before? Because it was easy. Because I put forth the effort. Now it's easy again. I have become more intelligent in the ways of math. And so our brain, our intelligence, how smart we are, it's not something that is fixed. So when somebody understands this with a growth mindset, belief that qualities can change, improve through effort, they're the people who are going to be much more successful in their academics and in other areas. I'm not good at this. Let me put forth the effort, the effort, the effort. I have become good at this. I'm not good at English. I cannot do English well. I put forth the effort, or grammar, or whatever, or writing. I put forth the effort, and all of a sudden it becomes easier. I have to be open that there's growth that can happen. Strategies for developing the growth mindset. Understand that your intelligence and thinking skills are not fixed, but can be changed, just like we said. Become passionate about learning and stretch your mind in challenging situations. Like when something's difficult, this teacher will not defeat me. This subject will not defeat me. I can do this. And so somebody who thinks positive and has that growth mindset is something that can facilitate greater learning. And so last two thoughts, think about the growth mindsets of people you admire. There are people who, when they're confronted with something like this, they have great fortitude and they keep pushing through. What this is challenging you to do is to do this for yourself. I hope everybody's feeling well, and I hope I can get this thing loaded on this program, loaded on Canvas. Give me a call, 985-788-4788. If you're having a problem, text me or call me. It's okay to call during this time frame. The test will be, I will put it up online Monday. You do not have to take it on Monday. You will have all the way to Friday or Saturday to take it. But after you open it up, you have an hour to take it. So don't start it until you're ready to start. So y'all have a great day. I hope we'll get back to in-class presentation. All right, thank you very much, and I'm out of breath. All right, take care.